And hundreds of schools are closed in Myanmar's Rakhine state after several days of clashes between troops and armed men. It's raised concerns in a region that has seen simmering ethnic tensions over the last 4 years. Scott Heidler's following that story from neighbouring Thailand.
In the latest fighting, 12 people have been killed. State-run media says 4 soldiers and 8 armed men died in clashes over Tuesday and Wednesday. The area is mainly populated by Muslim Rohingya. Security along the nearby border with Bangladesh has been stepped up after 9 police officers were killed on Sunday in coordinated attacks on 3 border posts. 6 suspects are being held in connection with those incidents. 4 years ago, sectarian violence between the Rohingya and Buddhist nationals killed more than 100 people. Tens of thousands of Rohingya were sent into displacement camps across Rakhine State. In most cases, their movement is heavily restricted. The Myanmar government does not recognize the Rohingya as an ethnic group, and Buddhist nationalists view them as illegal migrants from Bangladesh. The UN is urging troops and civilians to exercise restraint following the latest violence, calling the situation a delicate juncture for Rakhine. A new advisory commission headed by former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan made its first visit to the state in September. The commission was set up by Aung San Suu Kyi's government. She has been criticized for ignoring the plight of the Rohingya since taking office in March. Scott Heidler, Al Jazeera, Bangkok.
Well, she is a Nobel Peace Prize winner and seen as a champion of the oppressed, but some do say that Aung San Suu Kyi's silence on the Rohingya has been deafening. She's accused of ignoring rights abuses to appease Myanmar's Buddhist majority. In June, she told the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights the government would avoid using the term Rohingya to refer to the group. That was the same day a UN report said Rohingya had undergone systematic discrimination and had suffered treatment that may amount to crimes against humanity. The UN said reversing that situation must be a priority for Suu Kyi's government. Well, Lin Kwok is a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution Centre for East Asia Policy Studies, and she joins us live now from Washington, D.C. Good to have you with us on the programme. Why is it that Aung San Suu Kyi has barely even acknowledged that the Rohingya exist? There are something like 1.1 million Rohingya who are effectively stateless in Myanmar.
I think it's not that she does not acknowledge that they exist. I think the issue here is that the Rohingya as a community are not recognized as one of the 100 over ethnic groups in Myanmar. I think Aung San Suu Kyi is actually trying to work to better improve the human rights situation of individuals in the Rakhine state, namely the Rohingya. She's also facing political problems, I suppose, in the Rakhine state. In the Rakhine state, the Burman majority, who form the majority in parliament, in the national parliament, are actually the minority in the local parliament. And this poses problems, of course, for executing any sort of improvement in the situation of the Rohingya community in Rakhine. So that's one issue. What has been disappointing, however, is that while one could understand her reluctance to come down stronger on this issue prior to elections which took place in November last year. What's been disappointing is that since those elections and since her government took over in March of this year, there's been painfully slow progress in respect of the community who actually face very adverse and problematic living conditions.
Yeah, I think it's come as a surprise to some people internationally that Aung San Suu Kyi, of course, who's regarded as a heroine for championing the oppressed, for pushing for democracy in Myanmar, but who's not able to actually help the oppressed in her own country. You know, I think some people internationally might have thought, well, hang on a minute, her halo has slipped somewhat. Is she getting any international pressure over the state of the Rohingyas?
I mean, she is getting a huge amount of international pressure. I think, you know, very soon her honeymoon will be over insofar as this issue is concerned. But I think she has some legitimate justification for saying, in fact, that it's a problematic, it's a dire situation which requires time to resolve. And so, if we look at the situation in the Rakhine state, it did not happen overnight. tensions between the Muslim and Buddhist community in Myanmar have existed for decades, since the 1930s, and was very much a legacy of colonial rule, and which has since been entrenched by various discriminatory policies taken by successive governments. Now, these tensions erupted in violence in May 2012, and in the Rakhine State and elsewhere, and it's a problem that requires some time to resolve. But certainly that's cold comfort for the community of Rohingya living in Rakhine State in segregated camps, who face restrictions to their freedom of movement, who lack access to basic health care, to education, to basic sanitation, and who have the right to even marry curtailed. So, I mean, we're faced with a political problem which has great humanitarian and regional and international consequences for Myanmar as well. But, you know, time certainly needs to pass before this can be resolved. But I myself personally hope that this takes place a little sooner. It's bad not only for Myanmar in terms of its domestic situation, but also its regional situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that all these disputes are going to take a long time to overcome, and the diplomacy needed is going to be very great. How do you see things playing out at the moment? We've seen renewed violence in Rakhine State. How do you see things progressing from here?
I think the renewed violence is very problematic because it's violence well, Aung San Suu Kyi herself has said that we're not going to be pointing fingers at anyone until we have solid evidence of who's responsible for such acts. But already there's been speculation that it is Rohingya militant groups who are responsible, and the militant group that some communities, including a senior official in the Rakhine State, have pointed the finger at, has been dormant for a couple of decades now. But this accusation that the responsible group is a militant group feeds into the overall narrative that the Rohingya community are a dangerous community, and for whom Myanmar should not be a home.
Lin Kwok, good to get your analysis of the situation. Thanks for your time. Thank you. Now, there's heightened security in Beijing following a